Brent and Ryan in the morning.
Good morning. I'm Brent.
And I'm Ryan.
And this is Brent and Ryan in the morning. Guess what, Ryan?
What?
We're going to do a little celebrating. You know why?
Why is that?
Because we're halfway done. Woo! Yeah, celebrate. Way to go. That's right. This is awesome. If you are still with us, you are now halfway through the Immersed Bible Reading Plan, which means you're halfway through reading the New Testament. Way to go. Celebrate. This is an accomplishment. But we want to jump right in and pick up where we left off because we're going into the book of Philippians. Thank you.
That's right.
And there's really an encouragement there for where we are right now because Paul reminds us, don't give up.
That's right.
Because as we're in this reading, some days get long, sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're bored, but Paul reminds us, he's like, don't give up. Keep going. Press on. And that's one of the themes, I think, that we find in Philippians that we want to encourage people today. Just press on. Forget the past. Look forward and keep going forward. But you had something that you mentioned last time in the video that also applies to today.
Yeah. So last time we talked about the Christological chapter in Colossians 1, but we see that again in Philippians 2.
Correct.
And part of why Philippians 2 is near and dear to my heart is it was the first time where somebody challenged me to memorize a large chunk of scriptures. So I memorized Philippians 2 verse 1 through 11.
Not easy.
It's not easy at all, but now if I read it in any version other than the old NIV, which is ingrained in my mind, I automatically translate it to what I know.
But there's value there for doing that. In fact, you would
right.
probably say, let's encourage those that are watching today. Dig in. Try to memorize that whole passage in Philippians 2.
It's all about just this humility that Jesus gave up everything for us. And for a guy who struggled with pride for pretty much my entire life, that's like a life verse for me. Well, it's a very important verse.
I'm like everybody else. We have no pride struggles.
None
at all.
Brent, you were talking about one of the reasons Philippians is a little different from especially all the other books that we've read is that Paul's really writing to his friends.
He is. This is a letter, and unlike some of his other letters, there's not a lot of correction that's going on. It's really written from an encouraging standpoint, a letter to his friends, and just kind of, like we said earlier, just kind of keep going, keep pressing on. Here's some encouragement. Life may get tough, but you can do it, so don't give up.
Rejoice.
Lots of joy.
Tons of joy.
Oh, my goodness. In fact, Philippians is often called the joy letter. But, there's also a lot of short and pithy statements that Paul makes. And, you're talking about memorizing Scripture. As I read through this, there were a ton of things that I'm like, I've memorized that. Even though I didn't have the chapter and verse in this book, it didn't matter because, there's a lot that you can pull out. Like, don't worry about anything, but pray about everything, The other one was, the peace that passes all understanding is in there as well. So, there's a lot that should encourage each of us every day in our walk with Jesus as we read through Philippians. But then we kind of turn a corner a little bit and we jump to
1 Timothy.
1 Timothy,
And what I love about 1 Timothy is as we're reading through the last week, we saw almost every letter began with, this is a letter from Paul and Timothy, but then it said nothing about who this guy Timothy is. And so finally, as we're reading the introduction, especially of 1 Timothy, we find out, here's some background knowledge on who this guy is. And now Paul's writing a letter to Timothy, who's a young man, who's been with Paul through so much of the journey, been with him in prison, and is encouraging
And this is no
him.
ordinary relationship either. Paul really views himself as a father figure to Timothy, and he's poured so much of himself into him. So there's a really unique and special relationship. And you see as you read through 1 Timothy and even 2 Timothy that Paul highlights that, my dearly loved son, he even says.
Am I your Timothy?
Yes, my dearly loved son. That's right. If I had you when I was 7. Oh, wait. We continue to talk about how in a lot of Paul's writing, he reiterates a lot of things over and over again, just to re-emphasize certain things. And I think one of the things that I begin to see, and it kind of begins to blend together when you're reading so much at one time, is, one of the things Paul focuses on is he says, major on the majors and not on the minors. Don't get stuck in the things that don't matter, the old wives' tales and the speculation and all that. And, I think you and I would agree that even in churchianity Christianity today, there's a real big temptation for wanting to major on the things, and let's highlight things that separate us so we can't get along. And Paul essentially over and over in his letter says, stop doing that. Unity is important, and major on the important things, because he even says in this, he says, focus on the things that help people live a life of faith in God. That's the majors. Jesus Christ and helping people live that life of faith in God. That's what we have to focus on.
That's what we try to do as a church here at Ashworth.
Yeah, absolutely.
We recognize that in our pews, our people hold a lot of different views on a lot of different topics.
Do.
And it's you can have conversation or maybe debate about it. But we don't need to become one more statistic of a church splitting or yet one more Baptist denomination that we've got enough of them because we've split over the minors. And instead we say, you know what, let's come together to make a difference, telling people about the gospel of Jesus Christ.
If we keep Jesus in the center, that's what unifies us. And a lot of the other things can be secondary after we get Jesus right, you know. But there is another challenge too, because he talks about deacons.
Right, and specifically when he's talking about deacons, it is deacon nomination season here at Ashworth.
So if you know somebody that you would like to recommend as a deacon, go to that form that we sent out in the email this last week.
Right, and so that's why this passage, I think, for us is rather pertinent to talk about, is it talks about how deacons should be well-respected with integrity, and then it says, in the same way, their wives must be respected. But this was taught to me in seminary, where I'd never heard it, growing up in a place where you only had male deacons. That word for wives is the word gune, which as often as it's translated wives, maybe even more so in the New Testament, it's the same exact word for women. And it makes a lot more sense to say that here's one set of rules for male deacons at the top, and then here's the other things to add on to that for female deacons. Because otherwise, there's more requirements on a deacon and their wives that are never even placed on the church leaders or the elders.
Exactly. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we do translate that, like we use the NIV version mostly in our preaching, and we would say that the NIV translates it women, and that's how we take that as well. So, you know, one thing I loved about his letter to Timothy, and I didn't have my glass with me today. You know, when the stomach aches a little bit, what are you supposed to do?
Drink some wine.
Drink a little wine. We like Paul for that, don't we?
Little wine. Everything in moderation.
That's right.
That's also
and
biblical.
Those know they're out there watching. They know who we're talking to.
If your glass is this big,
too big,
smaller.
Back it off. No. Well, hey, a lot of stuff in Philippians and 1 Timothy. I hope you've enjoyed it. This week we're going to continue. We're reading Titus, we're reading 2 Timothy, and then we're jumping back into a gospel, and we're going to get this the very first part of Mark, I believe, later on at the end of this week. So it's going to be great reading. Congratulations again for making it halfway through. Keep going. We want to give away more stuff like these beautiful mugs. And so if you want one, remember, like this video. You want to get our attention, like it and share it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. The more you do, the more we see, the more when we can sit down and go, who do we give this to? Oh, that person's name gets to the top of the list. So, hey, this has been another exciting episode of
Brent and Ryan in the Morning.
We'll see you guys later.